today's debate, what we as the opposition house stand for is change. It's change for all. What we really stand for is sustainable change, because we realize and we acknowledge the fact that laws do not change the circumstances that LGBT people find themselves in. Laws do not change the fact that you are harassed and beaten and killed by your neighbor. Only a changing of public opinion can do that. And that's what we, as this side of the house, would argue is the way to go. What we've been saying basically in this debate is that what we would rather have our diplomatic ties do is to initiate a natural progression in a society's level of understanding of what it means to have human rights, what it means to have democracy, in a way that means people buy into the laws that we create. Even if we're able to force them into these laws, what this side of the house has not been able to show us is how that will result in any real change in the ordinary life and experiences of LGBT groups. And that's what we want in today's debate. I'll be dealing specifically with the arguments of what it really means for the development of Africa as a whole. But first, let's deal with a few points of rebuttal. Now, there were 4 main points that were brought up by the opposition side of the house, right? And this is one, that we want to protect our people who are gay, and this is how we do it. We would argue that people who are gay in this country are already protected. And so we don't see how imposing yourself on other countries makes them any more protected. But moreover, there was this argument about having consistency within the Constitution. Our Constitution also favors self-rule. Our Constitution also favors autonomy for those countries. And that's what we would like to stand for. So what we would argue is that instead of imposing ourselves, we should be using our strategic ability and our strategic relationships in order to help those countries transition in a way that's going to be effective in the long term and influence the lives of LGBT people as a whole. But moreover, having consistency in our constitution is valid within our country where our constitution applies. It makes no sense that we'll be allowed to impose our constitutions on other countries. So for those reasons, we'd argue that the motion, or rather these 2 points, fail. Then there were these 2 other points, right, of protecting these people in other countries, and lastly, the changing of moderates' minds. What we'd argue in the first case, what we were told is that, look, we'll protect them because it means that we force their governments to change their laws, which is something that their first speaker conceded to wasn't actually necessarily going to happen. So she was uncertain about that. And in my speech, I'll be proving why that's not going to happen at all, as our first speaker has already went into. But moreover, she made the claim that, look, they'll listen because they want our money. It is a small change in exchange for money. What we would argue is that there are 3 reasons why countries like African countries and countries like the US in general aren't likely to budge on this. 1, it is not a small change. This is an ideology that's been determined by systematic propaganda within these people's cultures. This is a belief that ultimately LGBT people are inherently evil, are inherently unnatural. This is something that cannot be changed simply by a changing of law. So it's not a small change. But moreover, we'd argue that governments are less likely to change just on principle. No government wants to be shown up as being able to be bullied or manipulated, as being able to be forced by another country. Governments want to appear strong to their people. And more importantly, if those people back that government in that opinion, they're even less likely to appeal to them. But lastly, we'd argue that this isn't the best way to allow this kind of change, and they're less likely to change because then you break the terms of your relationship. You are no longer a concerned friend or neighboring country that wants to see your people develop. Now you are the enemy, and I'll have more analysis of what implications being an enemy of those states will have. Yes, sir.
Would you then say that as a matter of self-interest and foreign policy, South Africa can buy out of the relationship with Israel based on the fact that they're oppressing Palestine?
1, I think that's irrelevant, and 2, I'd say no. So, now let's deal with this last point, right, where major contradiction and a flaw in their argument was made evident. Now, what we posed to them, what they told us was, look, ultimately a backlash to this policy will be that moderates will be more likely to change, their policies. What we were told is that the US and countries like the US that have clearly homophobic policies are moderates, and in fact are not the ones that will be targeted. We, as the side of the house, believe that if you don't allow homosexuals to marry, to have the same rights as any other human beings, that's inherently homophobic, and they should be included into those policies, right? Because that's problematic. That's what was defined by our first speaker. You're denying these people the rights, discriminating against them, and making a harsh and hostile environment towards them. But moreover, we'd argue that those kinds of people aren't going to change in any case, specifically in looking into the context of the American government and how it works as a state-to-state kind of organization, where there are very specific classes of people who are never going to change their opinions about homophobia. But now, having dealt with that rebuttal, onto this idea of the harms to the development of Africa as a whole, right? And we believe that it is the average African in the streets of Uganda and Kenya and others like it who are going to suffer most, including homosexuals. What we believe that in this case, it is legitimate to prioritize the rights that we need to have now in order for there to be sustainable change. What we believe is that ultimately, the proposition is taking a risk with people's lives, it's taking a risk with Africans' development, and it is a risk that has a dubious outcome. Firstly, I'll be proving that firstly, it prevents access to basic needs of millions of Africans, and secondly, it stops South Africa from being an agent of change to millions of other people on platforms like the African Union and BRICS, socially and economically. In terms of basic needs, what's already been conceded is our very special strategic abilities, right, and our positioning. We're one of the biggest suppliers and exporters into Africa: electricity, investment, education, and training, and those kinds of things. Now, what it would mean, firstly, to cut ties with countries like the US, with countries that are homophobic like China, like Russia, it means that there's a significant loss in the amount of investment that we're able to get for them. There's a significant loss in the amount of trade that we get to them. What that means is that we'll be less likely to be able to support ourselves, let alone the rest of Africa. And that's something inherently harmful. As was said by our first speaker, there's a natural progression with which things change. Our first idea of democracy was that every man has a vote. When we really looked further into that and we really had education, we realized that it wasn't just every man who ought to vote, but every person. This is the natural development of society as a whole. And as long as that isn't dealt with and we're not developing those African countries as a whole, that's never going to happen. But moreover, we'd argue that prioritizing the basic needs of Africans for electricity, for food, for trade, for survival is far more important and beneficial to these homosexuals as well as the rest of the population, and we ought to prioritize them now, to facilitate a situation where they're more likely to be able to be educated, more likely to be able to engage these kinds of issues. But moreover, in terms of the social political issues, what we see is that if you break these ties, it means that countries we originally had allegiances to, originally had good relationships to, are less likely to vote with us on pressing important political issues within the African Union because of this hostility. What this breeds is one, ineffective organizations like the AU and BRICS, but most importantly, it staggers change. It makes it so the rate of change is far slower than it ought to be, but it means that even issues that we can deal with, like women and their rights, which is far more tangible, far more easier for us to deal with, aren't dealt with. And lastly, we'd argue that third world countries need to stick together if we're ever going to transition and work with each other.